Hello everyone and welcome to ConfigMas 2024 and the Deployment Research YouTube channel. My name is Johan Arvidmark, and in this video you will learn how to do rapid testing of your ConfigMgr sequence. Fully automated, hint of PowerShell. That means of course demo time. So the scenario here is that I have a Windows 11 23H2 sequence that I want to verify that it works as it should. There are a few building blocks in order to do so. Obviously, you need to have the sequence itself. It needs to be deployed to one or more collections. You need to have something to test on, and you'll be surprised how much testing you can do very accurate even with virtual machines. Of course, you cannot test BIOS configurations and drivers, etc., but you can test pretty much everything else that the sequence does. Unattended XML settings, applications being deployed, etc. And you also need to figure out a way to start that deployment. While you certainly can pixie boot the virtual machine, it's often more effective, well, unless you're testing pixie, to boot from an ISO file. So that's what we're going to do instead. So that means going back to ConfigMgr for a bit here. So this sequence here, I want to deploy to a collection. And either I can right-click and click deploy and go through a wizard, etc. To do that. Or I can open up a bit of PowerShell and do the same thing. So here I have a PowerShell script that deploys that sequence to that collection. So just to show you, before I run this script, if I go to the deployment tab, there is only 2 collections that this sequence is being deployed to currently. None with that name having 23H2 in it. So if I go back to PowerShell, run this script here, go back to the console, and refresh this view here, I now have a required deployment to that collection. The next thing I need is a boot image, and I can either right-click sequences, create media, select bootable media and go through that wizard, or I can open up a PowerShell script that will create a boot image for me. It's going to create it in that folder with that name. It's going to be based on this boot image that I have in ConfigMgr, and just to show you, this is indeed one of the boot images I have here. This one. And in the end, it's just going to use a built-in commandlet to do that creation. So if I run this script here, it will create a boot image for me. Or I should say a bootable media of my boot image. But long story short, it created an ISO file for me. The problem with this ISO file is that if I would mount that on a virtual machine, it would still ask me to press any key to continue. And that is usually okay if I'm in front of the device, etc. But if I want to automate that part, well, I kind of need to make it not asking. And for that, I have another PowerShell script. It simply changed one of the files, or rather the bootloader of that ISO file, to a version that doesn't prompt. So this script takes my ISO file that I created and generates a new prompt version of it. So if I run this, it will generate that no prompt ISO. If you want to learn more about this, I do have a blog post. Let me close this one and open here again. If you search for quiet, this is where you have a little bit of background to what's going on for this. And this is also what it would look like if you start up a VM from an ISO. Now, I have a boot media. My sequence is deployed. I can now go over to my Hyper-V machine. So if I go over here, this is one of my Hyper-V hosts. This one has 128 GB of memory, and there are currently 8 CPUs on this one. But this one here creates a virtual machine. But I need something first. I need a network. So if I go to my Hyper-V Manager, you can see I currently have no networks here. So to create a network, I'm using this script here. The magic that actually does the work is this line down here, but this one is going to create a virtual switch named Chicago 01. So if I run this script, I may lose connection for a little bit here. I'm back again, go back to my Hyper-V Manager, and now I have my Chicago 1 network. Then I can go ahead and create the virtual machine. I'm using the built-in commandlets for PowerShell for Hyper-V, or PowerShell commandlet for Hyper-V. I'm giving the VM a name. I'm specifying a MAC address, and this is how I can import this one into ConfigMgr later. A bit of memory, disk space, CPUs, etc., the network to use, and the ISO to boot from. And just to make sure I have the latest version of the ISO, I will go ahead and copy that one over to this machine, just to be sure I have the latest ISO here. Copy this one over and replace the file I had. So the ISO file copied. Before creating the virtual machine, I want to make sure that ConfigMgr knows about this machine even before it's being created. So this information here I have copied and I have available in this script here. So if I just paste it below, you will see that's the same information. So this is a script that will take a collection, create a computer in that collection with that identifier, meaning that MAC address. So it's going to do the import. This would be the equivalent of you going into the console, going to devices, and do an import computer information. But this, of course, is the PowerShell edition of it. Then I need to wait a little bit until ConfigMgr creates the device. That can take a few minutes. And then just to save some time here during the demo, I am enforcing an update of that collection, that which I added device 2. So this one here, meaning my mass deployment collection. So before running this script, I will go over to my ConfigMgr console, and as you can see, there are currently 6 items in this collection. So I'm going to run this script, and due to the magic of video editing, I will cut away these weights here, but here we are. The script finished, and it sure looks like it added the device into the collection. But let's go over to the console, refresh this one here, and we now have 7 items, and you can see that last item was added with this MAC address here. So that means I can go back to my Hyper-V host, and I can go ahead and create that virtual machine. Right now, this host have no virtual machines at all. I'm running this script. Creates the virtual machine. It is configured to boot from the ISO. Right here, the no prompt ISO. And if everything works, this boot image will now automatically pick my 23H2 sequence and deploy it. So, using a healthy dose of PowerShell, I can run through my testing end to end. Very, very quickly. But what about doing this on a larger scale? deploying multiple VMs over multiple Hyper-V hosts, all fully automated? Well, that is the topic for part 2. This concludes the end of part 1, showing you the needed building blocks, and in the next part I will show you to do this fully automated across a large fleet of Hyper-V hosts. So until then, thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you for part 2. Bye for now.